If we really know that digital technology and social media apps are really bad for teens, then why do we push so much of our world towards it? What are parents supposed to do knowing that most of the things that are in teens culture is really driving bad mental health? Dr. Kathy has some important insights and some guidance for us as we consider this topic. But before we jump into the episode, I want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Verse Chocolate. Verse Chocolate is dark chocolate done right. It's the better dark chocolate. It has all the benefits of dark chocolate without any additives that really are unhealthy. And it's gluten-free, dairy-free. It's all the frees. It's really good. I encourage you to check it out. Just go to versechocolate.com. Now let's turn to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, the Surgeon General recently released an advisory statement warning that screen time and social media use in particular is threatening youth mental health in a degree that he considers is, quote, the defining public health issue of our time. You know, unlike many other maladaptive behaviors that teens are susceptible to, we can't really issue a zero tolerance policy on screens, right? I mean, for drugs and alcohol, it's easy to draw firmer lines in the sand, so to speak. I mean, vaping, for example, is never healthy for teens and really could be avoided entirely. But smartphones and screens are really almost a necessary evil in this teenage world, it seems. But it's not all bad. I mean, some parents will say that it provides connection or easy communication. It assists with learning and can help teenagers in many capacities gain independence at really a critical time of learning what independence is. You know, there's a 2019 study that kind of suggests the 4Ms as a way of moderating or engaging teen screen time that I think in some ways supports what the Surgeon General is talking about. These 4Ms are to manage screen use, to establish meaningful screen use, to model healthy screen use, and then to monitor for unhealthy screen use. Now, I could ask a larger question here, and I think it's important to. Are we misunderstanding development for kids? You know, I think screens kind of give us this, I don't know if it's like a false sense of what the priority should be, that we need to speed up our kids' ability or knowledge or, you know, their opportunity to engage the world, because all parents, you know, in some ways, shape or form use screens and technology in their jobs. And we just feel like kids need to be prepared, you know, tomorrow to be able to word process or, you know, get into building a PowerPoint slide for their, you know, third grade presentation. Really, a lot of this can kind of call parents into this place where we are conscious more and more about what our kids are engaging in these little facets of life. What would you say would be some good maybe models for parents to take on so that we don't kind of lose ourselves inside of screen use? And we end up, you know, highlighting that things need to become, you know, faster, smarter, better, and really some weight might be placed on us with these 4Ms. And ultimately then screens end up being the tail that wags the dog in terms of, you know, our kids' development. What would you say would be some top things that we would keep in mind from this screen use and how we can kind of engage this, knowing this is happening right now in our world?
Yeah, I appreciate that we're talking about this again. We could talk about it constantly, and we should bring it up constantly because it's real. And we understand that parents today, and even our educator friends, are potentially struggling with how to make these decisions. So yes, like manage screen time, make sure it's meaningful, model healthy screen use, monitor for unhealthy screen use. So do our kids know why we use tech and why we don't use it at times? Do they know that we're frustrated that we have so many virtual meetings at work rather than, you know, taking an elevator, walking down the hall and meeting with at least some people in person? Do we talk about that? Do we talk about how somebody said one day that email will eliminate the need for paper, but it's actually the amount of email we get is just insane and frustrating, and, you know, the spam and the lack of real communication, the confusion that can happen from people who think they answered, but they didn't. I mean, I could go on and on. We have that happen here at the ministry. So I think we don't, you know, modeling proper use at home, but do we model and talk about proper use outside of the home as well? I wonder about that. You know, do we talk about not using tech when we don't have to? like the value of a paper book, the value of paper and pen. Just did a workshop recently, and I was suggesting a process that would require vulnerability for parents to be able to kind of go deeply inside of themselves and really think deeply about something. And I recommended boldly paper and pen or their favorite pencil and paper, because there is research that says that we're more vulnerable and more careful and more thoughtful with, pen and paper. Do our kids know that? So that if they're working on a first draft of something, do they know that the blank screen is intimidating, but a blank piece of paper might not be as much? Do we teach those things? And the other thing I think of in the context of, what are some models that parents can present? Wayne, we have got to do better at teaching want and need. Like I will say this almost every time I teach technology, I talk about there's a difference between, wanting a phone, needing a phone, wanting a faster signal, needing a faster signal, wanting to play a game, needing to play a game, et cetera, et cetera. So we can teach our children. That starts when they're 1, 2, 3, 4 years old. I want a cookie or I need a cookie. No, you don't need a cookie. You want a cookie. I need a glass of water. That might be true. So we have to teach the proper use of that word so they get it, because I think that's huge and a huge thing that we should be modeling more effectively.
I love that, Dr. Kathy. I think that's so helpful. I want to throw a question at you that I don't know if you're prepared for. So surprise, surprise. I think you're prepared for most questions except for maybe this one. But when we look at especially kind of teens and this engagement, I do really feel like we've almost, put the cart here and we're looking for the horse to kind of guide us with it. That we say that kids need technology. And I'm asking maybe a bigger question in my kid's life. Like, do you actually need screens? What you just talked about with teaching young kids to kind of get to that place of want versus need, what would you say would be some legitimate engagement for our kids from maybe a technology side? And how can we have that conversation with them to guide them to understand that having social media apps might be more of a want rather than a need? Because even though the world would say that they need it to connect with their friends, should we be pushing them to build other connections, other relationships? Because we know that, in-person relationships, going to my friend's house and knocking on the door, like kind of a goofball, I felt like right now, right? At like 8 or 10 years old, and having his mom tell me that he's not there was something that built something in me for life. But also I value personal relationships better. Do we need to really maybe put a stick in the sand, or how do we walk our kids through this is maybe more my question. How do I walk my teenager to this place of want versus need with technology when maybe it hasn't been something that I felt like I've engaged already? I've almost been boiled to death as a frog kind of in this, and the culture is now telling me this is a need. And maybe I want to pull it back and say, well, wait a minute. How do we have that talk with our kids?
I love the question. I love the frog analogy. This is where we sit down and slow down and say, man, we owe you an apology. We've allowed you on the screens because everybody was doing it, and we got sucked into that same mentality that there's nothing really wrong here. But we've noticed that you don't prioritize in-person relationships, that having friends over, going to a friend's house, hanging out at the park and shooting hoops, what we used to do as kids, that it's not important to you. And it's not important because you don't know the value, and that's on us. So what I would prefer would happen, Wayne, like if somebody's listening with young enough children, I don't believe they should be introduced to social media or even texting relationships until their heart has been oriented toward the beauty of relationships with people face to face. Because if we know what can happen when we hang out and we have an anything goes conversations, we become decision makers and problem solvers, and iron sharpens iron, and there's beauty and laughter and tears, and there's support. And there's someone I can call now when my grandpa's sick, because I know they know me well enough to support me in that trauma that I'm experiencing. But if we only have texting, we don't have that. So ideally, we allow them and encourage them and motivate them and maybe make them develop heart relationships before we introduce the convenience and efficiency of relationships that can be born by screen. And they don't have to be on social media. They certainly need to have limits there. And we need a friend and follow. And that's, we need an hour to unpack all that. But, and I think the need and the want starts with us. And I think one of the reasons that this is hard work for parents is that what we're asking parents to do is take a hard look at their own use. Like if you always have your phone at the dinner table, really, are you that important? Or is it a need-based need to have your phone at the dinner table because your mom is sick, or a friend might need you to help out tonight with a project that she was unaware, needed to be finished for a church committee meeting that takes place tomorrow. That's how you teach kids. Hey, mom gets to have her phone tonight because is a powerful word. Mom gets your phone on tonight because you don't get your phone, but mom has hers. There's a need. There's a reason. You don't have a reason. Go put your phone in the basket where it belongs. We have got to take the ownership here as moms and dads and put our phones down and turn off the screens and play solitaire at the dining room table, double deck, and teach kids how to win without pride and lose without complaining. Don't let them do it all independently on their devices. That's where the selfishness and the self-centeredness is born. And when that happens, it's so hard, so much harder to back out away from that, right? Not impossible, but so much harder.
Yeah, Dr. Kathy, I really appreciate that to an extent. I mean, I asked you a question about my kids, not about how I should handle tech, and I love that you're, kind of coming in the back door and getting at me, but you're so right? Like the idea of how we model it, I would call it maybe even like the decorum or, to use some big words, or even like the etiquette of having this and what to use is kind of there. What do you're raising your hand at me, which I love.
Because I think,
I call on you, Dr. Kathy.
Yeah, that's so fun.
I feel like a teacher now. Yeah, this is good.
People may not realize we do this in a visual space so we can make eye contact. But what struck me as you were speaking is that this is the beauty of a family deciding to work on something. Ideally, a husband and wife, if you're parenting with someone, praise the Lord, you get on the same page and you decide you're both frustrated with how often you're on your devices and that you don't want to be separated at home with the man cave and the Pinterest room, to be kind of stereotypical here. And you want to engage, you miss your kids and you want to engage with them. And so you have a conversation and your children help you decide, let's set this goal for the month of June and let's hold each other accountable. Now, if they respect you and they can hold you accountable without, shame and blame and making you feel like you're 8 when you're actually 38, then, Lord willing, I think that would be a really cool thing to do. Get them involved if you can. And make a family commitment to something, and then get out of the house and shoot hoops and go buy a new board game and a jigsaw puzzle and blow bubbles in the backyard and have s'mores on Friday night.
As Dr. Kathy was talking, I was reminded of a passage that comes out of Psalm 45, and I'm going to begin reading at verse 16. Your sons will take the place of your fathers. You will make them princes throughout the land. I will perpetuate your memory through all generations. Therefore, the nations will praise you forever and ever. I love this psalm in light of what the psalmist is writing about. This is a wedding song, and it's a song that celebrates and praises God and how he is establishing a kingdom that will reign forever and ever. And at the end of the psalm, the psalmist kind of looks and says, and your sons will be prepared to take the place of their fathers. They'll be like princes in the land, and we're going to now perpetuate the memory and the knowledge of God throughout all generations, because nations will praise God forever and ever. I wonder sometimes if we just rush through things. We don't necessarily take the time, as Dr. Kathy had said at the end of this episode, to pull back and consider how we're guiding our kids in these different moments, to share with them the disappointment that we have with different technologies or different realities that are kind of present in our world. And we don't take the step to say, this is not right, but it's the way the world is. And so how are we going to now go and redeem this or restore the original intent of these different relationships that might be more efficient with technology, but maybe need some touching up or some engagement in other areas to make them stronger and to gird them for a purpose and a place in the world? I do believe that what Dr. Kathy said about talking to our kids about this and walking them through this moment is really going to be a bright light that is going to give them courage to take steps into places where they might feel like technology really isn't helpful or it actually is a burden. But if they know that they have a companion to walk through that with in us as parents, that can be a big encouragement. And I want to encourage you to do that today. And we hope that this episode's been an encouragement to you. It's something that friends around the country are helping support. One of them is our friends at Verse Chocolate. I want to encourage you to go to their website, check out some of their chocolate, and maybe thank them by buying a box for the contribution that they're making to allow this podcast to carry on. You can do that by just going to versechocolate.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast, this daily segment, Facing the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender, and I'm looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.